Welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, live from the virtual grill room of the St. Francis Yacht Club. We hope you're all safe and sound during this COVID-19 pandemic. And we know that since you can't come down to the grill room, that one of the ways you can enjoy our Wednesday Yachting Luncheon is through these virtual meetings. Our speaker today began sailing as a young 10-year-old, and she completely immediately fell in love on a family boat, a family friend's boat. And by the time she was 11 years old, had saved up her babysitting money to buy an 11-foot sea snark. And she loved the sport so much she spent parts of her 11th year in life at the library studying all about sailing until she knew that she was an expert. She knew all about sailing, having studied at the library. And then at age 12, she got out in a boat and immediately went sailing and was very impressed with herself there on Long Island Sound, sailing out of Glen Cove. And as she sailed away from the dock, she knew she had everything in complete control. Things were wonderful until she decided to turn around and go back and realized that she didn't know how to do what we now know as tacking. She couldn't tack, and she kept trying to come back and trying to come back. Finally, embarrassed as it would have been for her, she had to stand up and wave her arms as unnautically as one can to signal to those ashore that she was a landlubber still, and they came and rescued her young preteen self, and she came back to the dock. But she endured. Her love of sailing continued, and by the time she was 14, she and her friend were restoring a blue jay, and the two of them used their female sort of like skills and natural attributes to charm the older boys into helping them fix this blue jay, especially those boys who worked in the chandlery. In fact, the girls had the audacious move of bringing the blue jay on its trailer right there and parking it right next to the chandlery so that they were never far from the parts they needed to fix their boat. She continued sailing through college and sailed 420s at Swarthmore College and sailed thistles at University of Oregon and sea scows on the lakes in Minnesota. And by the time she was a professor at Dartmouth, she was a good and able sailor. Dartmouth didn't get to hold on to her, though, because the good folks at UC Santa Cruz stole her away to become the director of coastal science and public policy and a professor of environmental studies at UC Santa Cruz, where she's created a brand new program, which she's going to talk about today. And she's also going to introduce some product from that program. She'll introduce 2 of the first 10 graduates of this new program that she has at UC Santa Cruz. During her spare time, I'm sure she has none, she's also become elected as the chairman of the Union of Concerned Scientists. So it is with a big smile that we welcome our guest today, Anne Kapuscinski. Welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.
Thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be here. I need to make one small correction because I went to Oregon State University and the Beavers would never forgive me if I made it sound like I had been a duck, although my brother was a duck. He was at University of Oregon. So it's a rivalry that lives on. So let me,
for the correction.
You're welcome. Let me share my screen here. So as Ron mentioned, UC Santa Cruz wooed me away from Dartmouth to become the director of a brand new program that was actually designed by an incredibly visionary and audacious group of faculty members. And when they showed me the description of this program to try to convince me to come and interview for the director position, I immediately went for it because I had been building similar kinds of programs at other universities, but always feeling like there were administrative hurdles to do it at the scale and with the innovation that I saw was in this program. And before I talk, I'm going to talk to you today about the program and why it's so important at a time in our world when we have so many challenges on coasts and oceans. But let me give you a little background of how it came to be that I'm speaking to you today. Last year, I went to London to receive a really exciting innovation award from what's called the Ocean Awards. They're given out once a year in a coalition between Boat International, which runs a big boating yachting magazine, and the Blue Marine Foundation. They're both based in London. And when I attended that event after the wonderful award ceremony, the next day I was invited to attend these talks that were organized by Boat International at the Royal Geographic Society. And I discovered at those talks that people in the yachting community, at least on that side of the world, were paying attention to the cascading threats that are facing our oceans and coast, and were wanting to figure out what they could do to help address these issues. And so I started wondering if there'd be similar interest here in North America. And I was talking to Randy Repass about this, and Randy suggested that he could introduce me to Ron Young, which he kindly did, and I'm very thankful to him for doing that. And he told me about these Wednesday yacht lunches. So here I am, and I'm very thankful to Randy for making that introduction. I've met Ron only recently, but it's already been tremendous fun to get to know you. And this picture here shows the students in the very first two classes, or we call them the first two cohorts of the Coastal Science and Policy program. Let me tell you a little bit about the motivation for this program. In a nutshell, the survival of humanity and the survival of a lot of our biodiversity on this planet depends on the oceans and depends on the coast. But unfortunately, as a civilization, we have been really abusing the health and the well-being of our oceans and coasts. We've been taking too much out, primarily through extractive fishing that has too often been unsustainable. There are also other problems such as sand mining, things of that sort. And especially we've been putting too much in. Everybody knows about climate change being a problem, but you might not all know that about 90% of the excess carbon dioxide that humans have pumped into the ocean, pumped into the atmosphere, have actually been absorbed by the oceans. So the oceans have absorbed a huge amount of the heat, and also from absorbing a lot of this carbon dioxide have begun to acidify. And this is causing all kinds of enormous transformations in our ocean and coastal ecosystems, everything from sea level rise and extreme storms threatening the coast to temperatures threatening coral reefs, et cetera, causing an uncertain future for our ocean. We have a number of really big problems. These problems are both challenging at a local scale, but they manifest globally. In this talk today, I actually don't want to get into all the detailed science of everything that we know that's wrong in these problems. I instead want to focus on telling you about what we're doing in our graduate program to actually accelerate the training of leaders who can solve these problems. But I just want to give you a feel for the fact that there are at least these four big problems, and there's a huge wealth of science behind it documenting the extent of these problems and the impacts they're having on biodiversity, on human livelihoods, and on even on the stability of our climate system. And we also know that these four problems of climate change, unsustainable fishing and aquaculture, habitat change, and ocean pollution can interact in ways that increase harm. And I've put on this slide a quote from one of our most famous marine biologists of our time, Jane Lubchenco, who said in a recent paper, the ocean is becoming higher because of sea level rise, warmer, stormier, more acidic. Those are all because of climate change. Lower in dissolved oxygen. That's because of ocean pollution from nutrient pollution, and more depauperate, which means it's losing a lot of its biodiversity. We also know from work of political science and policy scholars that the problems that coasts and oceans are facing fit a type of problem that's called a super wicked problem. And super wicked problems have a number of really nasty characteristics. First of all, they're problems where we know from the science that time is running out to solve the problems. Essentially, if we don't find ways to solve some of these problems soon, we might not be able to. For example, with climate change, the problem eventually might have too much impact, and it might be too late to reverse the killing off of coral reefs, the tremendous movements, changes in where fish populations are distributing themselves, and even affecting ocean currents that could affect our climate system. These problems also are often very difficult to solve because the very people who want to end the problem might also be unwittingly causing it. And that's often due to global supply chains. And I'll give you an example later when I talk about the work that Casey did while she was a student in this program. They're also very difficult to manage through policy because often the scale is international, or at least crosses the boundaries of two nations. And we often lack a central authority that is strong enough, or it's just non-existent to solve the problem. And most of our policies, even if we have them, they discount the future irrationally. So they're really not charging the price that we need to motivate ourselves to make the changes that are needed today. So the founders of the Coastal Science and Policy Program looked at this, naughty situation of wicked problems and said to themselves the following, and I joined them because I completely agree with what they were arguing for. They thought, despite the difficulty of these problems, the one thing that we have that's a limitless resource in our civilization is human ingenuity and human persistence and drive to find innovative ways to solve problems. And so the idea is that what we need to do now is accelerate the training of leaders for solving wicked problems. What we need is to take young people like Ross and Casey and others and have them be able to fully embrace the complexity of the wicked problems, but not get paralyzed by that. Instead, learn how they can find a path, essentially pull the right thread from their problem so that they can get onto a problem-solving path and be able to collaborate and work with others in all kinds of sectors, private, nonprofit sector, and government sector, to come up with evolving solutions. So the Coastal Science and Policy Graduate Program has a very specific theory of change to be able to achieve this acceleration of training of leaders to solve these problems. And the first step in our theory of change is that we want to hunt around the world to recruit the emerging young leaders, be able to recruit them globally, because we know that the creativity and that innovative spark knows no national boundaries. We have brilliant young people with the passion in their bellies to do this work everywhere. We then go through a rigorous recruitment process and admissions process and accept the best and the brightest of our applicants, and then also assemble financial support so that the cost of tuition and the cost of living at UC Santa Cruz and having a living stipend while they do their work is not an obstacle. And we try to make sure that it's a diverse cohort to represent the diversity of creativity that's out there and of different ways of life and different life experiences. When they're with us, then our theory of change has very specific goals in the 2 years of the master's program. In year one, our students go through a number of interdisciplinary courses, that most of which have been tailored for this program. And the overall focus and mission of all this whole curriculum is to build their leadership and solution skills. And then in year two, they go off campus. They get out of the ivory tower of academia on purpose, and each of them in their first year identify a partner organization that also has that same sort of knack for innovation and wanting to solve problems. And they go spend their second year working in partnership with a partner organization to actually pursue a solution that they've developed a plan to work on for that year. And one of the things we train them is to look for solution paths that are scalable. So then the idea is that after they graduate, and this is the fourth step in our theory of change, we're hoping that the degree essentially elevates their post-degree career. It takes them to a new level of leadership and impact, and that they will then, for the rest of their careers, become more and more effective leaders and in the solution space where they're really focusing on impact and scale. I also have several arrows on this slide that I want to say something about. We on purpose accept fairly small numbers of students into each cohort or each class so that we can really do incredible quality mentoring. So we do individualized and intensive mentoring. And I made this arrow start before they arrive, because especially with our second class and our third incoming class, now that our program is better established, we have been purposefully working with them before they even get here to allow them to start planning their ideas, start expanding their networks, and even start to go after other fellowships and scholarships. And we plan to continue that mentoring after they graduate. And throughout throughout the 4 stages of this theory of change, and we want it to go on throughout their careers after they graduate, we want to develop and strengthen an inclusive community and make sure that they continue working with the alumni, continue to work with the new cohort so that we essentially expand their networks throughout their careers. To accomplish this, we have an interdisciplinary faculty, and UC Santa Cruz made a major commitment to this program by creating 4 new faculty lines. I was hired into one of those to be the director of the program. And our faculty members come from a number of different departments, from environmental studies, ecology and evolutionary biology, earth and planetary sciences, economics, I think of, and we also have some real world practitioners who are working for conservation organizations such as Conservation International, who come and do some of our teaching. And this word cloud in the middle just gives you a feel for the diversity of things that we engage with, both in our solutions focused courses and also in many workshops where we bring in practitioner leaders that the students can interact with. I want to tell you now a little bit about our first class. We had 10 Wells Fargo fellows who started in September 2018. They literally graduated yesterday. And they come from 7 different countries. And I don't have the time to tell you about the amazing work of all 10 of them, but I'm going to feature the work of 3 of them. So our first example is Casey Zweig, who graduated yesterday. And she came to us already being passionate about the problem of plastic pollution, which is a huge problem in coasts and oceans. She had worked before joining us with the city of Malibu, worked on waste management issues and got involved in some groundbreaking efforts to stop the disposal of single-use plastics. But she entered our program with this instinct that turned out to be totally right, that there must be a better way to address this problem at the source of the problem. And she went hunting when she was trying to figure out what she would do for a capstone project. She went hunting for, is there an organization out there that's actually taking a more proactive approach to solving the problem at its root? And she discovered an amazing startup in the Bay Area called Full Cycle Bioplastics. And to make a long story short, she spent her capstone year as the first director of operations for this new startup. The goal of Full Cycle Bioplastics is to stop our linear economic approach of taking materials, making something, and then ending up with waste. And instead, harnessing the circular economy approach to solve plastic pollution and food waste carbon emissions together by doing the following. One of the members of this company discovered a bacteria, naturally occurring bacteria, that if you feed it food waste, will secrete a material that is essentially a biodegradable PHA, which is one of the most important building blocks of plastic. And so they're able to make a bioplastic from food waste. And what Casey accomplished as deliverables in her first year was really exceptional. She basically oversaw the operationalizing of the first operational facility and also assembling the first well-trained team. So Full Cycle during Casey's capstone year established at the Google campus this first pilot scale facility, which essentially is a 10 times scale up from their technology in the lab. And I'm going to try to show you a little video to give you a sense of essentially what they do. They start with this food waste. It's taking a little bit of time to load. Casey, you're welcome to pipe in here if you want to add something as this is loading.
I think that's Dane Anderson's hand, and he is our founder and one of our co-CEOs. And we were commissioning this brand new shredder. So when we receive food waste from the Google kitchen that we're co-located next to, we tip that food waste into the shredder. And we were still kind of working out the kinks at this stage, but it gives you a sense of the food waste that we take in. We shred it, and then it goes into a press because we're separating the liquids from the solids. And then that carbon-rich liquid goes on to create the bioplastic, and then the dried out solids are composted, and the compost is used on local farms that sell their food back to Google.
What percent of this product is productized, and what percent becomes bio-waste?
Usually with food waste, you can have anywhere to 50 to 70% is liquid. And so those liquids go on to make the PHA, and then the leftover dried out solids are the portion that is composted.
And in this picture here, Casey's holding a few examples of some of their small scale materials, small scale examples of materials that they've made from their PHA to just prove the concept that this can be scaled up. Next slide.
The question I ask is, you compost the part that isn't productized. What percent per pound gets composted versus productized?
Probably about 30-70. So about 30% stays as solids and is composted, and about 70 we're able to extract liquid. And then I think what you're getting at too is the ultimate conversion factor into PHA.
Yes.
And that really depends on the food stock, the feedstock that we're bringing in. So we think that we operate in carbon. And so it depends how carbon rich the liquid is that we're dealing with. So if we're taking in all lettuce, that might be a little bit different than we're taking in a bunch of apples. And so the richer in carbon the material is, the higher conversions into PHA. The nameplate capacity of this demonstration site at Google is to produce 10 pounds of PHA per day. And that would be the equivalent of, say, about 4,000 single-use forks.
Casey, give us those metrics again. So if you take in a ton of waste.
Yeah, I think on average, if we're taking in anywhere from a ton to 2 tons a day, that gets us to our 10 pounds of PHA. Okay. So the nameplate capacity is to take in closer to 3 tons of material per day at this site, but the inbound side is actually oversized. So 1 or 2 tons of waste will get us to that 10 pounds per day. And the nice thing is that this technology scales really well, and it can be built into a small site like we see at Google that's more of a demonstration. But the technology itself is actually derivative of wastewater technology, and so we can easily scale with larger tanks, larger reactors, and co-locate next to existing waste infrastructure, so that we can still serve, 10 tons per day, or even much more than that, 50 tons per day of material coming in.
So let me see if I got this right. In terms of scalability, if you were to take 3 tons of, this is all food waste. This is not plastic waste, this is food waste.
Food waste, and it can be any organic waste, but they're using food waste.
Okay,
Correct.
I got you. Okay, great.
Okay, Casey, say a little bit about these slides and then we should move on because I have many other things to talk about.
Sure. So as Anne mentioned, we really take a circular approach to the materials that we're creating. And because of that, we have a myriad of benefits that come from our work. So directly, we are, we have material innovation built into our process where we're creating a superior alternative to plastic that can biodegrade easily, whether it's in compost or if it accidentally were to end up in the environment. And then indirectly, there are these broader system implications where, because we're making a truly valuable product out of things that were previously considered waste, we're actually making waste handling profitable in places where it currently isn't. And so we spur infrastructure investment in those places that helps really clean up the waste collection problems, so that you're getting rid of litter while you're also making a replacement to petroleum-based plastic.
So from the perspective of the program, one of the reasons I had also wanted to feature Casey's capstone is because she wrote some things in her capstone report that illustrate what we see through a lot of our capstone projects, but this is just a great opportunity to summarize it well, and it's part of what we really wanted to accomplish, if you think back to our theory of change for the program, by having the students spend that entire second year immersed with a real world partner rather than being in academia, but they're still getting academic credit for this. It allows them to learn and apply their leadership learning on the job, essentially learning by doing. And Casey really nicely articulated some of the leadership lessons that she learned that will carry her through leadership success throughout her career. First quote that I loved was, "You don't have to know everything, but you can't use that as an excuse not to act." Second quote, because they had a lot of things go wrong before they got to some good success, "Don't panic, assess, adapt, and pivot quickly." And I think that we saw similar themes in the capstone reports of a lot of our students, but this just illustrates it well. And then secondly, you can see very well from the kind of project she was working on that it's addressing a problem that shows scalability. So the work that she will do after graduating will pave the way for scaling this up on a much larger scale than what she was able to do during that 1 year. Second example I want to talk to you about is Celicia Guy, who's from Belize, who also graduated yesterday. And she worked on a very different kind of project. And I want to give you a feel for the diversity of the projects. She came into our program already I used to refer to her as the goddess of manatees, basically in love with manatees and very concerned that this is a highly endangered species. She had a sense from her work she'd already done in Belize that boat traffic, water traffic collisions was probably an important cause of collisions, and she wanted to figure out what could be done to address that problem.
Hi,
Can
my
you hear
name is
now?
Alicia Guy, and I will be talking to you about my efforts to help save the endangered Antillean manatees. My capstone project is an analysis of manatee strandings and risk from watercraft collisions in Belize. My platform is endangered species protection, and when I joined the Coastal Science and Policy program, I chose the Antillean manatee as my focal species, a species that I've been working with for the past 7 years. Antillean manatees are important coastal species. As the only herbivorous marine mammals, manatees really drives the productivity of seagrass ecosystems. Manatees are also very vulnerable to coastal changes. The aim of my capstone project is to identify the dominant threat for manatees in Belize and to create a model to assess this. The model that we created incorporates aerial survey, stranding, and boat registration data to try to assess the risk of watercraft collision. We created 12 zones across Belize and assigned those data to each zone, and we calculated the stranding incidence within each zone. The stranding incidence is the number of manatees that strand as a result of watercraft collision, providing the number of manatees that is within each of those zones. So ultimately, we wanted to answer the question if there's a relationship between boats and manatee strandings. And our analysis shows that yes, there is a positive relationship between the two. As the number of registered boats increases, so does the number of stranding incidents increase across the zones in Belize. We also looked at the temporal and spatial trends of strandings, and our analysis shows that strandings are not uniform over space, with the zones of concern being Zone D and Zone K. Our analysis also shows that strandings are not uniform over time, with the majority of strandings occurring in the past 10 years. We also calculated the density of manatees within each of these zones, given the available habitat. So the habitat type that we looked at were mangrove, seagrass, and lagoon systems. Our analysis shows that within each of these zones, the zones with highest density of manatees are zones D and zones K. So ultimately, our analysis shows that the zones of high priority are zones D and zones K. And taking this analysis and applying it to conservation action, we developed a conservation strategy for the Antillean manatees in Belize with a targeted focus at reducing the risk of watercraft collision. The deliverables of my project includes a manuscript to share this new information with the wider scientific community, a summary of this manuscript to be shared with the government of Belize, and a conservation action plan that is really informed by the science of this manuscript. Within this conservation action plan, we recommend special actions for the zones of high priority. I'd like to acknowledge my partners. Thank you.
Our third student whose work I want to illustrate is Ross Davison, who's with us on this talk, so he can also help pipe in. And Ross had actually had an interest in this problem before he joined the program and had already started a startup company to develop some of the technology for this, but was interested in learning more about ecology and developing some of the skills in graduate school. And the problem that Ross was interested in is the fact that we have natural spaces both on coastal areas such as our wetlands lost in California. We also have fire problems in places like Australia. We have high deforestation in Brazil, etc. So we have these natural spaces around the world that are being threatened by extreme weather events, urbanization, invasive species, and global warming. And the scale at which scientists need to both analyze what's happening on the ground and especially need to be able to monitor whether interventions they make to try to conserve or improve environmental conditions are working, the scale of that is just too labor intensive and expensive for people doing only by sending human beings out in the field as practitioners. So the solution that Ross and some of his colleagues worked on was to harness the power of digital imagery from drones and 3D models to identify threats to natural spaces through artificial intelligence driven pattern recognition, essentially harvesting the power of computers and artificial intelligence. And the technology that he has developed can generate very detailed information about the plant species composition in an ecosystem, and also the underlying geomorphology and hydrology that drives what those plants composition are. And in his capstone year, he did an amazing job of doing feasibility tests with 3 different partners. Ross essentially reached out to these partners and established relationships with them, the Nature Conservancy, the National Estuarine Research Reserve System at Elkhorn, Slough, and some researchers at UC Berkeley who work at the Angelo UC Reserve and the Eel River watershed. I'm just going to show you a little bit of what came out of one of his case studies working in Elkhorn, Slough, which is right near Moss Landing and essentially at the downstream end of the Salinas Valley. And as some of you who might know the Central California coast might know, the Salinas Valley is the I think it's referred to the salad bowl of the United States. There's a huge amount of agriculture and a lot of agricultural runoff that's causing a lot of algal bloom problems in Elkhorn Slough and in that whole entire area. So he showed in his case study that taking these drone images of capturing what was the extent of cover of algae in 2018, and then the extent of cover of algae in Elkhorn Slough in January 2019, and then putting them through the AI pattern recognition and the other methods of his technology, they were able to actually quantify the extent of algae cover and water cover and how it changed from time to time. So in 2018, for example, you saw 14.4% algae cover, whereas in January 2019, it was 22.8%. And then they can also generate a deliverable that actually shows the cover difference of algae and water in those 2 time zones. The reason this can be helpful, and what Ross is going to continue working with his partners to help advance, is that this could help inform the strategies that the managers of Elkhorn Slough are already considering as ways that they could control the algal blooms in Elkhorn Slough. Their goal is to reduce these algal blooms so that you maintain better habitat quality for all kinds of wildlife, and especially a lot of the birds who use Elkhorn Slough. So they have salinity sensors, they have tidal gates that they can manage, and they have temperature data. And with this kind of higher resolution data and pattern recognition that Ross has generated, it actually empowers them to be able to align those sources of information and figure out what kinds of manipulations they could do to better manage algae. And Ross will be able to scale up the outputs of this work by going back to his company, Common, and which he's the CEO of. And one of the wonderful things that happened recently is Ross and his partners were accepted into the Tech Futures Group back in April 2020, which will give them a lot of mentoring for scaling up the startup and being able to access seed funds. Let me now move to talking to you about our second cohort, who have just finished their first academic year of classes and are getting ready to go out into the world to launch their capstone projects. So the 2019 cohort, who've just finished their first year of courses, have strong professional experience and diverse skill sets. And it ranges from prior experience establishing the first ever policy department at a major international conservation NGO, RARE, and on the case of Galuh Sekar Arum, who's from Indonesia. Patrick Cage, whose passion is climate action, worked as a consultant for 4 years, working on carbon analysis and helping countries around the world on their rural and international climate policy. Galuh is going to be conducting a capstone project to evaluate the success at integrating conservation successes in her country into actual government programs so that they will really scale. Patrick is interested in studying the role of youth climate movement for mobilizing youth voter turnout in battleground 2020 races. Tom Collison, who's from the UK, came to us with a passion for locally led fisheries management that will improve wildlife conservation and also sustainable management of people's livelihoods. And he plans to do a capstone project that will work on these issues in West Africa. he previously had worked for Blue Ventures, which is an NGO that does a lot of innovation in the marine space, headquartered in the UK, but works around the world. Maxwell Kodia from Kenya has a real passion for combining the application of statistical methods and engaging small-scale resource-poor fishermen to work together to better sustain coral reef ecosystems. And for his capstone, he's going to test a low-cost assessment method working with the fishermen and with statistics to sustain coral reef fisheries. Abel Muklama, who's from Malawi, is passionate about reducing deforestation in coastal watersheds, again by applying a circular economy technology to replace firewood with much cleaner, sustainable, and affordable briquettes. And he's already innovated developing a cleaner burning briquette from agricultural waste. And for his capstone project, he will run pilot tests of that, working with rural communities and develop a business plan for its scale up. And Andu Rabirosa, who comes from Madagascar, comes to us with already a degree in marine economics. She's passionate about linking market analysis with ecology to improve marine conservation and livelihoods of small-scale fishers. And in her capstone, she'll be pursuing some innovative solutions to link those two things and reduce poverty in fisher communities. Our last two people in this cohort, Rafid from Indonesia, is already an award-winning leader on conserving endangered sharks and rays and had founded Thresher Shark Project Indonesia. And for his capstone project, he's going to combine satellite tracking and acoustic tag technologies to identify critical habitat for these beautiful thresher shark and find alternative livelihood solutions for the coastal fishing people who hunt these species. And Juan Carlos from Peru comes to us with already a lot of experience working on conservation of marine top predators, including birds and marine mammals in Peru. And for his capstone project, he wants to integrate new tools for spatial planning that can also be used working with fishermen to essentially avoid bycatch of undesired species. And across both of these cohorts, our students have had tremendous recognition outside of the academy. For example, just this past winter, Casey from our first cohort and Rafid from our second cohort were invited panelists on a panel held by the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. Abel, who I was just talking about a moment ago, won second prize at the UC Santa Cruz Grad Slam competition, which is where people get to pitch an idea based on their science. Malia Kotis, another student who just graduated, I didn't have a chance to talk about her project. She won best overall presentation among all graduate students at UC Santa Cruz who had presented at a graduate symposium. And Patrick Cage and Maxwell are part of a team that won one of only 4 global awards awarded by the Bridge Collaborative for what's called the Bridge Spark Fund. And they're going to be doing some work on holistic ocean farming in Africa. And then finally, we have an incoming third cohort who come from primarily from the United States, and then 2 students, one from Indonesia and one from Mexico. We're really thrilled to have them joining us this fall, and we're especially grateful to Randy Repass and Sally Christine Rogers, who have provided support for a Repass Rogers Fellowship in salmon restoration, California salmon restoration policy, and that fellowship will be held by Timothy Scully, who has been working on that issue actually for many years. And so we're very excited about them joining us. So I hope that my short sort of quick overview of what we're doing in this program shows to you that we are already realizing our theory of change, and our students are raising ambition together with each other and with their partners. This is a great photo of Abel and Patrick, who were both delegates at the Climate Treaty Talks in Madrid back in December. Abel was actually officially part of the delegation of his nation of Malawi, and Patrick was part of the entire University of California delegation because University of California is very involved in some carbon offset programs. So where I want to end is to say to you, clearly we've done some amazing stuff in these first 2 years of assembling these interdisciplinary cohorts of rising leaders with diverse skill sets, and they're driving multiple solutions to global problems. To keep this program going, we need your support. To be able to attract this kind of quality, young, emerging leaders from around the world and not have the cost of a graduate education be an obstacle costs something. And so it requires resources from philanthropists like you. For example, the Wells Fargo Foundation was generous in allowing us to launch the program, and we were able to support our first 10 students in the first cohort in that way. And now we're at a point where we need to talk to people to get some additional support. We're extremely grateful to Randy and Sally Christine for having stepped up to help support one of the students in the incoming cohort. And I would be delighted to talk to anyone who would be interested to learn more about how you can support this in order to be one of the great ways that you can do your part to make sure that we have equipped the next generation of these rising leaders as well as possible so that they can tackle these enormous, challenging, but yet solvable ocean and coastal challenges. And I've put our website for donating at the bottom of the slide and also my email address.
Wonderful, Anne. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Great. People tend to think of a college class or colleagues or associates. Give us, and you're using the social media term of cohort. So please tell the audience who doesn't necessarily know what is a cohort and why you're using that term in this context.
A cohort is essentially the same as a class. It was the terminology that the planners of the program had come up with before I came, and I didn't think to challenge changing it, but we might end up changing it. And we tended to name them by the year that they entered. So the first cohort entered in 2018. They've just graduated, and we are in fact beginning to call them the graduating class of 2020. I think maybe part of why they thought of a cohort is because we're being very selective. So these classes are not large on purpose. We are aiming for approximately 10 master students. In my formal comments, I didn't talk about the fact that we have also started a PhD component, but we intend for that to be relatively small, something like 3 to 5 at the most in a year. And these would be students who are getting PhDs in existing degree programs that are more bound in one discipline, but they can then do essentially a PhD minor in coastal science and policy. So the point is that a cohort signifies that to enter this group, the applicants have to go through a very rigorous selection process. We recruit applications from around the world, and we have 2 rounds of vetting, including a pretty demanding, slightly nerve-wracking, very short interview that we do by Zoom, regardless of where they are around the world. So that's my answer.
So how many people did you screen, or how many candidates did you review to select the cohorts of 10? You've had 3 such cohorts of 10.
The numbers have ranged from about 70 to 120 applicants. And then for the first round, we go through those. It's a lot of reading, very interesting. It's very hard to make decisions because there's incredibly talented young people out there in the world. But we narrow it down to 20 finalists, and then we interview all 20 finalists. And I don't know what the interviews were like when Ross and Casey went through them, because actually the cohort that Ross and Casey joined were chosen before I arrived. They were interviewing me essentially while they were running through their selection process. But in the 2 years that I've been here, I've run interviews for the second cohort and the third one, and each time we've actually increased it. We've increased its sharpness, I would say. We've sort of zeroed in on some more probing questions to ask. And we essentially challenge them in the oral interviews to already present to us an idea for a capstone. And we partly evaluating, does it have legs? Do they already get the idea that you should be focusing on something that's scalable? And have they actually picked a problem that's big enough and important enough for us to devote the resources that will go into investing in them for 2 years? And as we just told the graduating class yesterday at our Zoom graduation ceremony, we expect them to be part of our community for the rest of their careers and lives. So we expect to stay in close touch, be their mentors and advisors, and we also want them to keep advising us about how to improve the program. So essentially, we're building a global network, and I want this network to grow in size and impact and to remain tightly connected. Because the other thing I didn't get a chance to say earlier is I sincerely believe that the way we're going to solve these wicked problems where we don't have easy answers is by people being able to work together. And the more they already know each other and are well bonded and have had a shared experience of getting their leadership skills honed, the better they'll be able to work together. So my vision is that our graduates will continue to work with each other across international boundaries to solve these problems.
Ross, tell me, give me your elevator pitch.
Yeah, sure. So effectively right now, the vast majority of conservation initiatives, both in the ocean and on land, are being implemented without actually having a monitoring, assessment, or evaluation program, which means effectively they're doing a lot of backdoor planning, putting it into place, and hoping things work. And while that works in some cases, there's been a movement towards adaptive management, which is where you actually take those implementations, look at the metrics behind them and see if they are being efficient, and then correct them to make it more successful. But getting those kind of metrics can be cost effective, or it can be too expensive, require too high capacity for groups to actually be able to use. So we're trying to remove some of those barriers behind cost and expertise, so that a much larger number of conservation organizations can start to have much more efficient conservation interventions.
So now, are you being paid in this capstone project or this business that you started, or are you looking for funding for it, and or both?
Kind of a combination. So we've already taken on contracts with a number of groups on individual programs. So taking in payment on that side, and we're also seeking seed funding at the moment.
So you're getting professional services revenue as you start up, and you're seeking funding. Okay, so you're out looking for money in the Valley. Where are you looking for money?
Yeah, in the Valley, also weirdly on the East Coast, there are a number of different venture firms that kind of invest for impact that we've been working alongside with to find our initial investors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Casey, same question to you. Give me the elevator pitch on your business and tell us about it.
Sure. So I work for Full Cycle Bioplastics, and we actually use one global problem to solve another. So we take food waste that would otherwise go to a landfill and be emitting lots of methane, greenhouse gas, and instead use that as a feedstock to naturally make a bioplastic that can completely break down after its use and simply be remade into virgin bioplastic or just returned to the earth.
So, Casey, what are the worst things that are being put in the oceans these days?
I think that plastic is definitely one of the top things in terms of harmful impacts to the ocean. I think that we kind of can't keep pace with learning about how bad they are. It's like the more we study it, the more we learn that it really is truly awful from all kinds of standpoints. We know that animals get entangled in it, but it can also break down into these tiny nanoplastics, which they can then consume and are also quite harmful.
And I'll just pipe in that, I mean, another big problem.
Give us same question. What are the worst things that are being put in the oceans these days?
To me?
Yes, Ann, please.
Yeah, so I would agree with Casey about plastics. The other is, the really big one is nutrient pollution, and it's primarily runoff from the land from agriculture, but sometimes also domestic sewage or just runoff from highly urbanized areas with a lot of runoff from the streets. And so we're getting excess of nitrogen and phosphorus in places like the Gulf of Mexico, and we're ending up with dead zones. Again, I didn't want my slides to be all about how horrible the situations are, but I could have shown you maps of the world where you can see the hot spots of dead zones. And basically all the big bays in the world and our enclosed seas are dead zones. And one of the reasons, I mean, that in itself is a bad problem, because in those dead zones, you end up with no dissolved oxygen in the water that kills off all the marine life. Now you've got problems where fishermen's livelihoods are destroyed. People who love to go sport fishing or diving or just enjoy wildlife for their mere existence, that's all gone. The wildlife that other animals depend upon, you know, such as seabirds, are destroyed. But on top of that, we now know from the science that you have synergistic interactions that are bad between polluted dead zones and climate change. Climate change is actually making our coastal waters warmer, and that also reduces the dissolved oxygen that the water can hold. So if you add that on top of nutrient pollution, you're going to essentially magnify the dead zones. You're also going to make it harder for the ocean to actually absorb the carbon dioxide, because the carbon dioxide, excess carbon dioxide emissions that we've been putting in the atmosphere, I'd said earlier that about 90% is being absorbed by the oceans. It's absorbed partly by living organisms that take in that use the carbon dioxide. So if you have too much nutrient pollution, then you're going to disrupt that.
So, and what percent of the capstone project, what percent of the students who graduate have a job when they graduate, a paying job?
The cohort that Casey and Ross are in are the first guinea pigs, but of the 10, 8 of them, 7 know for sure what they're doing next, and an 8th one is probably going to get a job offer from one of 3 like major places. So there's really only 2 who are a little bit up in the air about what they're going to do next. And they're incredibly talented, so I'm quite sure that something will work out for them.
So I hear you say 80%.
Yes.
Graduates graduate with a job.
And remember, they graduated yesterday, and the other 2, I think if you ask me that question in 3 months, it'll be 100%.
I think it's also worth noting that it's during COVID.
Exactly.
Well.
Yeah. I mean, I was afraid that the pandemic was going to really hurt that statistic. And I was starting to, like, before I started counting it, I began to worry because I know how talented these young people are. So when I saw this, I thought, yes, this is another sign that our theory of change in this program works. And I would argue that we're having that high success rate partly because of the kind of people we have brought in. When you saw me sort of speeding through the background of the other cohorts, you can see a common theme. Everyone who's come into our program has already had some substantial work experience. Even in the cohort that's coming in the fall, there's one student, he'll be our first student who's coming into our program straight out of a bachelor's. All the others have worked 2 to 10 years in the real world. But even that student who comes straight out of bachelor's, he is a go-getter and has been working with a number of really key government agencies and NGOs in Florida. So they come already well connected and valued by people who would like to hire them, probably even if they hadn't gone to graduate school. And then in our program, we make it a priority for them to connect with lots of other luminaries and change agents, both in the private sector, the public sector. We introduce them to program officers at foundations. We do everything we can to help increase their network. And so I think you see the benefit of that.
So about 20% of Wednesday outing luncheons have something to do with the environment. And most of the speakers on the environment offer a solution and create solutions. It seems to me a bit unique about what you're doing is you're wanting to create leaders who will create
solutions. That's right.
Yeah, instead of giving fish, you want to give fishermen fishing nets.
And the reason to do that goes back to my point at the beginning about these being super wicked problems that are distributed around the world, and we're running out of time to solve them. And so I stopped, I was looking at it for me personally. I thought, okay, I'm in the later stages of my career. How can I best use my time, leverage it to try to accelerate our ability to solve these problems? And it doesn't take rocket science to eventually come to the realization, well, you invest in the bright minds, because as I said earlier, the one thing that I think we all can agree is a limitless resource on this planet is human ingenuity, drive, passion, and creativity. So our goal of our program is to find those most promising leaders and then step up their leadership skills, their knowledge, and their connections as fast as possible. It's the other reason why we want to emphasize the master's program. We recognize that people getting PhDs also are brilliant, and we're seeing that PhD students are also hungering for this more practice-oriented approach. So that's why we added also a PhD component, but the heart of it is the MS program that's 2 years, because we want to do this to be high quality, but also getting the people out there quickly, because the problems are accelerating fast and we need to have people developing these solutions fast.
So these are 2-year programs or 3? Is it a 2-year master's program?
2-year masters
program. The degree comes from UC Santa Cruz.
Yes.
And where are you recruiting your candidates from?
From around the world. So far, our students have come from 13 countries, including the United States.
30 candidates have come from 30 countries. Have I got that?
No, the students we've actually accepted represent 13 countries, including the United States. But if I were to look at the whole pool of applicants, I don't know if I remember the number, but it's probably something like 30 nations represented. I can't guaranteed to that number, but it's a lot of applicants from many different places. Many of our applicants come from Southeast Asia, essentially from the tropical areas where there's a lot of marine biodiversity, some from the Pacific Island states, some from Central America and South America. We're increasingly getting more from Africa, from the Caribbean. So in this cohort that just graduated, you saw the video of one of our students from the Caribbean, Celicia Guy, but we had two other students from the Caribbean, Shakira and Andre. Andre is from Grenada, and Shakira is also from Belize. So they're really from all over the world where marine resources and the oceans really matter.
So are you recruiting yourself, or do you have other colleagues who know what you're hunting for and who say, here's a great candidate in New Zealand or in the South Pacific? How do they get to you?
It's a combination of the two. It started before I came, because it started with the networks that our awesome faculty have. And, you know, I didn't have the time again in this talk to talk about them. We could probably have several months of Wednesday Yacht Club lunches just by having them come in and talk about their work. But they are stellar, award-winning research faculty with connections in the US and other parts of the world because of the work that they do. So they started off by just emailing everybody they knew and saying, we're launching this new program, you know, recommend people to apply. When I arrived, I started with their email list and basically just continued to build it out. I myself am a recipient of a well-known global award in marine conservation. I'm a Pew Fellow in marine conservation, and the community of Pew Fellows is now quite large. I think a couple hundred Pew Fellows who are distributed around the world. So I leverage that network to spread the word about our call for applications. And we have many other networks of that sort. And when we put out the call, we do it on our website, social media, emails. We basically say people can apply directly, but if you know someone, please nominate them. We basically will take any possible way to identify somebody who's talented. And with money from the Wells Fargo Foundation, we also started really hard. I mean, this was an intent from the beginning, but we started very hard last year to try to recruit more consciously for diversity in the United States. And we're really delighted at the makeup of our incoming class. It's just the start, but that's the other thing that we did.
So Casey, give me a day in the life. What are you going to do tomorrow? The day's almost over but tomorrow's Friday. And give me a day of life of what you're doing right now.
Sure. So I serve as the Director of Operations for Full Cycle Bioplastics, and my focus for the past year has been bringing our demonstration scale facility at Google online and really running it as a production facility to prove that this isn't something that you can just do in the lab, but we can actually make a viable economic product from the food waste at Google and turn it into PHA bioplastic that they can then use in their food program. So I would head into our facility in Mountain View and ensure that all of our tanks and reactors are working as they should. We make different food to keep our bacteria happy. And then we would do a production run. So we have two reactors. We have a selection reactor and a production reactor. And we essentially train these bacteria to sprint eat because we want to harvest the fat molecule out of these bacteria. So we make some very, very hungry bacteria. And when we do a production run, we give them all of the food they've been waiting for. So they eat really fast. And then we say, okay, thank you. And we stop the reaction and we're able to harvest that fat molecule that resembles plastic. That goes through a centrifuge so that we have a cell paste, which is our finished product at Google. And we send it to our research and development hub in San Jose, where it's then extracted. And so we remove the bacteria fat from the cell. It's crushed up, dried, goes through an extraction process, and then it can be turned into different kinds of products.
Different kinds of plastic products or plastic-like products?
Yeah, if you were to hold it, it feels like plastic, and it can basically be a drop-in replacement for many, many kinds of plastic. Right now, our clients are most interested in food applications. So single-use food packaging has been our focus. And we've been making different kinds of films.
Mm-hmm.
And
So
Casey, you
can
should tell them a little, oh, sorry, I was going to.
clear? Can you make clear plastics with this technology?
We actually can, and that's something that's unique to Full Cycle. So PHA is not a new material, but the way that we make it is different, being from any kind of organic waste. And our patented process differs from some other PHA producers. Historically, PHA has generally been a very rigid and generally white plastic. And we're now able to make clear and flexible films, which really opens the door for all kinds of applications.
Ross, day in the life.
All right, day in the life, I think is a little different than Casey. We're at a much earlier stage. So it's a combination of outreach, working on applications like we're putting together for an SBIR NSF to do a little bit more research around some of the analytic processes we're working on. And then just crunching a ton of data. I mean, right now, each project usually runs through about 15 to 50 gigs of imagery. And so we'll go through and we'll work with a number of algorithms of image alteration processes to effectively take this really stock drone or satellite imagery and turn it into something that site managers can use to understand their spaces better. So right now, what we're working on is a restoration project with the Nature Conservancy, where we're quantifying the amount of invasive species they have so they can do a large scale restoration and then evaluate how well those eradications are going on site. So that's kind of my day to day.
So you said you've gotten some professional services contracts while you're in the early incubation stage of the business?
Yeah.
Do you have tell me how many people are on your team and how do you divide labor? What's your role?
Sure.
So CEO, but when there's 4 guys around, CEOs also means a chief bottle washer.
Yeah, no, I know. Right now there's just 3 of us, so it's kind of scramble. We all have a very set expertise. My background is in data capture and analysis. I've worked with remote sensing for about a decade. So I'm taking on a lot of those development projects. So figuring out what kind of tools we're using, what kind of analyst processes we're going to go for, and then what that deliverable looks a little bit like. One of the other collaborators, Alex Reinhold, is a PhD in computer science. And so he was just key at writing a lot of the algorithms and doing a lot of the data processing. So he's really spearheading a lot of our algorithm training and development of new analysis techniques. It's been really, really exciting. I've worked with Alex for almost a decade at this point. And it's always a really fun process of going back and nerding out on all the different things you can do with the data. Our last collaborator is Chris Knight. He's a PhD candidate at Stanford in ecology and evolutionary biology. And so he understands the ecology in a way that Alex and I don't. And so I've been really fortunate to be in the Coastal Science and Policy program because it's finally given me kind of a baseline of understanding of those underlying things taking place, right? So if I don't understand why algae blooms are happening or why you are having restoration projects, Chris really comes in and provides us the impact and the application side of things. So right now it's really me and Alex working on development and processing, and Chris fine-tuning some of those reports and outputs.
So I'm interested in what does success look like for you? So tell me 5 years from now, what's the business doing? You know, this is like 30-second answer. And what are you doing in the business?
Sure, for sure. One of the big things that we would love to do is serve a lot of the really underserved organizations that right now don't have the capacity to do a lot of the geospatial monitoring of their assets. And so it's doing things like holding utilities more accountable when they are doing mitigation practices as far as, you know, where you're seeing damage and then how you offset that damage. Working with groups who have great conservation projects, again, usually in more susceptible areas, poor communities, to make those green spaces and natural spaces healthier and more abundant. And so it's kind of just having an effect overall where you're seeing these natural spaces be more healthy, work better with the communities around them, and just grow the idea of conservation and successful conservation.
So Casey, what does success look like for your company and for you 5 years out, let's say?
Success means that we have commercial facilities that can turn organic waste into PHA bioplastic deployed all over the world, particularly in areas that don't currently have waste infrastructure. And so that means that not only are we successful as a business in deploying our technology and making this highly valuable material, but we're also cleaning up the oceans and the land from plastic pollution. And it means we would have disrupted a multi-billion-dollar industries actually, in both petroleum-based plastics and waste collection. So that's our vision. And I certainly hope that I'm there to be part of it.
In doing what? What's your role going to be? What would you like it to be 5 years from now?
I really enjoy working in operations and actually figuring out how to map our technology onto larger systems and train the people that need to run them. And so I would like to continue running operations for Full Cycle.
So now it's appropriate to ask the proud mother hen. You've got these 13 hatchlings. Give us, what does success look like for you in 5 years out? It's 2025. What does success look like for the organization and for you?
So not the success. So the success for the organization is that we continue to have these kinds of amazing students, but that we're seeing that the alums have actually either landing at the helm or high up at the helm of leading organizations, have perhaps started new organizations, and that they can show tangible, scalable impacts of the work that they've done for the last 5 years. And they're also coming back and mentoring whoever are our students at that time, and that they're networked across all the classes. Another part of success is that we have stabilized the funding support for this program so that I don't have to lie awake at night worrying about how we're going to continue to support successive cohorts so that they can continue to do this great work. And that we have become, we believe that this is a world-class program. I'm quite confident that this is the best program of its type. There are some other professional master's programs, including in the marine area, that have a piece of what the students do relating to interacting with a real world client. But we're the first program that dedicates an entire half of a 2-year degree program, an entire year, to being immersed in the real world. And we really think that what we're doing is the best in class in terms of that. But I want it to be that 5 years from now, we're world renowned for that. It's actually known that this is the place to come to, so that we have even more applicants, and hopefully people wanting to support the program are knocking at my door. And that we can point to specific places in the world where our graduates have had specific, really positive impacts, and we're able to show that those impacts have scaled.
And what are you doing 5 years from now?
Well, 5 years from now, you know, most people in academia would have retired already at my age. I'm not ready to retire yet. 5 years from now, a lot of people, my family would probably be pushing me to retire. And I guess I would be thinking, if the program is really running smoothly, I might still not retire, but I probably would be working on, and I would have actually started before then, on actual succession planning. And of course, in academia, I don't get to totally control that, but I can definitely have a lot of say in how we recruit who's going to be the next leader. So I would be, in terms of me personally, thinking about either I've by then have had a succession plan and sort of been able to help recruit a great next leader, or if I haven't done that yet, I'm very much in the midst of that, so that we know that the program will live on for decades and decades to come. And you know, I have the experience as the chair of the board of directors of the Union of Concerned Scientists of seeing how the seed of something can grow to last for a long time. Last year was the 50th anniversary of the Union of Concerned Scientists, and I'm only the 4th ever chair of the board of directors. Until recently, 3 of those chairs were still alive. One of our really fantastic prior chairs just before me, Jim McCarthy, very famous climate scientist, recently passed away. But so there's only me and one other former chair alive today. The other former chair was one of the founders of the program. He founded UCS back in 1969. And yet I was the board chair who was asked to speak at 50th year anniversaries around the country. And in my last presentation, which was held in October 2019 in Boston, one of my main messages is that I want to see the Union of Concerned Scientists live on for the next 50 years, the next 100 years, the next 150 years, and that continuing to have the positive impact it's had. Well, I know that we can do the same thing with the Coastal Science and Policy Program. So 5 years from now, I want to know that I have put in place the mechanism that I can hand off this program to another dedicated, passionate leader and know that this program will continue for at least another 50 years and hopefully much longer than that.
So, and many environmental scientists are developing solutions. You are developing leaders in the field. So thank you so much for the contributions you're making to the environment with this incredibly ambitious and exciting program. It's been our pleasure to host you at the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. We thank you so much for the great work you're doing, and thanks so much for being our guest. Ross and Casey, thanks for also being our guests, and thanks for the great work that you're doing. And with that, the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon program, which is now in its 54th year in existence, is adjourned. Thank you all.
And thank you so much for having us. It was great.